You're a startup founder. You think your product is amazing and feel like more people should be buying, but the road is long and slow. It feels like you're stuck. There's always one thing I ask startup founders. Have you talked to your customers? They almost always say, heck yes, we talk to our customers all the time. But what I find is they're either selling or trying to improve their product. These are not customer-focused conversations. If we can get curious about our customers, then we can uncover critical insights that will help us build to the next round. I'm Anna Firmenov, and welcome to Building with Buyers, a show about startup growth where I'll explore how customers help startups build to the next round.
Next time I'm riding my bike, I will wave.
Okay.
and
you do the
yell,
North Shore
Anthony!
Bike Path, is that right?
Yeah, the Green Bay Trail.
That's right by me. I'm like right off that trail.
That's why I'll wave my hand. Maybe we can get together for coffee. That would be great too, you know?
Hop in.
Anthony Pierri helps founders market hard-to-market products. And you've been doing that for a while now because I had you on the show before, back when it was called Modern Startup Marketing, episode 199. And we talked about why your homepage is a great predictor of your startup's future success or failure. So we talked homepages, and I know we'll talk about that today as well, but a bit more, some other stuff too. So you're a co-founder and partner at FletchPMM, and you're, as far as I understand, it's similar to when I last had you on. So positioning strategy deck is something that you work on for your clients. And you focus on just the homepage messaging. Is this something that you guys narrowed down to? Because I remember in my notes from last time, you were doing more than just the homepage.
Yeah, we mainly do homepages. And we have gotten more specific too to say we focus primarily on positioning. So for a while, the headline on our website said, let's fix your confusing homepage. And more people would come to us with homepage related problems, right? Conversion rates down, we want to get more traffic and people and stuff like that. When we realized that's actually not really the main value we provide, it's more on the positioning side, which then we say you can document on the homepage. So for us, we changed it then to say, let's fix your confusing positioning, leading with positioning questions first, and then saying, okay, are you willing to actually make this positioning strategy a reality? And a good litmus test for that is if you can get a group of executives to say, we are willing to actually say this on the homepage. So I was working with a company last week, and when we made the positioning strategy together, everyone was on board when it was in a PowerPoint deck. And the moment we showed it to them in a wireframe of a homepage, everything fell apart. They were like, oh no, actually, we don't want to do it. Because what we see is like people like strategies in theory, but then the moment the rubber hits the road, they'll just default to whatever they've always done. So that's why we tie those things together. It's less about conversion rates and even the effectiveness or importance of a homepage itself. That's not actually the main thing that we care about. Like we've worked with companies that are like, my homepage doesn't even play a big role in my go-to-market. And we're like, that's fine. That's not why we're using it. We're primarily using it because we know if you can get everyone to agree, you only have one homepage, right? You can't have like, well, Jeff wants his homepage and Sarah wants hers. There's just one for the company. So it's like, if you can get them to agree to the strategy in principle and then also be willing to put it on such a public, prominent asset, the likelihood that they're going to actually follow through and bringing this message to the market is just a lot higher. So that's why we connect the two things together. But we are often combating people thinking, oh, so you guys do conversion rate optimization. I come to you if I can't get these people to convert. And we're like, that's not really what we do. And most of the positioning products that we do are when people are repositioning and it's not just a tweak in the message. So people will come to us either at the startup level where they say, okay, I'm maybe doing $1 million a year, but that million is divided between 5 different segments. Segment 1 is giving us 200K. Segment 3 is giving us, 200K, whatever you want to go down the line. And our team is getting pulled in 5 different directions. One team member thinks that we should go hard on this one. One team member thinks we should go hard on that one. We've been beating our heads against the wall. We need to make a decision, and we just are going around in circles. And so they'll bring us in, and we become this external mediator to basically map out, okay, if you really were to choose one of these, are you thinking about the segments in the right way? that's usually a point where everything breaks because a lot of times people are not good at segmentation in a B2B context. And we can talk about that. That's a really fun discussion. But people don't really know how to segment in a way that's going to help. So they might think that these segments are right. So basically, we come in, help them understand what the segments actually are that would make sense to have different strategies, evaluate those strategies, basically talk through the risks associated with them. Because a lot of times, too, the people we work with are not marketers. Most of the founding companies, they go through Y Combinator or whatever. They've got a technical person and they've got like a more sales visionary person, and they've never done marketing. So they don't really understand the implications of what they're saying or what they want to do. So we come in basically from a marketing perspective and say, okay, if you go down this positioning strategy, it's going to have ripple effects on what you can do in your marketing that you're probably not aware of. And then sometimes they'll have implications on product strategy and things like that. So we basically help them understand what really are the different markets they could focus on and then help them make a choice. And we basically are like the external, almost like, if you have a financial advisor who says, do you want to put all your money in Bitcoin? That's a really risky strategy, but maybe you have a really high risk tolerance. So we basically say, okay, these 5 strategies, you could go down this path, but it's going to be pretty risky. Do you want to do that? So once they've made like a pretty holistic shift of like, I'm going to point the company in this direction, then what we say is, okay, we want to document this because you're going to likely have to run at this for at least 12 to 18 months. So it's like a long-term bet that they're trying to make. And the first initial documentation that happens on the homepage becomes just the first flag in the ground of running. We often give the parallel of it's like, you're going east or going west. We're trying to decide, do you want to go east or you want to go west? Not necessarily what's the exact coordinate of where you're going, but more directionally, which way do you want the business to go? And that can happen with big companies too, right? Like we've worked with very large companies, some, multi-billion-dollar enterprises like Fortune 500, and they are facing the same problem in a lot of ways. They're like, growth has stalled. We need to make a bet. We can't just keep playing in this one little category. We need to decide to either go this way or that way. So it's usually in moments of like big company shifts that they would bring in someone like us, not like, oh, we know exactly who the group is. We know exactly how we help them. We know exactly the stuff that works in the sales calls. And we really just need to fine tune the individual messaging. You would be wasting your money on someone like us. You'd be better off going to a conversion rate optimization person or someone else who does like more fine tuning of the messaging.
Totally. Yeah, I work on similar stuff with my clients, and they're typically around that $1 million. I think that there's probably some kind of pattern here because the $1 million mark is where they either know what they're doing and they're marching along, or they're trying to make a decision because there's too many things that they're saying and they need some help figuring out what it is that they're going to all align on. But you're right. It doesn't just end in early stage startups. It's also, it kind of comes back. It comes back. And I think it comes back when it's time to open up to a new market or you built a new product. And then you have to work on this, like, how do you position it again? What do you say? And who do you say it to? Right. So very similar there. Episode 199. That one, again, I'm going to bring it back because that's a really good one. We talk about the homepage. And you just do the wireframe, right? Like you don't design it. You just do the wireframe and then it's on them to work with their designer to design it.
Yeah, and we have
right?
a good design partner that we'll recommend, a guy named Riley. He came out of the same agency that me and my co-founder spun out of. And he's like our long-term partner. We've done probably, 80 to 100 projects with him. And that's usually a good option because he also is positioned very similar. He does very like standardized, productized work like we do. So if people don't have a designer, we'll usually point them to them. But a lot of the companies that we have a designer. So they already have a CMS in place and they're already have the website and everything. And they really are just like, we need help with the content that's in there.
Yeah. Okay. That's where I kind of go a little bit deeper with my clients, and I have a designer and bring him in and sometimes help on that front, but sometimes just work with their designer. And so then it becomes like a whole thing with brand and how do you represent your company in terms of like the brand, the images, like how does it all come together? But anyway, that episode, we talk about like what's wrong with so many homepages today. We talk about the vague outcomes, visionary messaging versus can you just talk about what is this product and specific use cases and just be more clear, the functionality, all that, and then how to fix those problems. So we talk about that in that episode. Today, let's actually talk about what you said on your own homepage. You talk about let's fix your confusing positioning, and you used to talk about let's fix your homepage. And so people, you just mentioned like that was a problem because people came to you and it was about conversion rates and all that. You didn't want that because you're really trying to move the ship. You're not just trying to tweak like some windows on the ship. You're really moving the direction of the ship. So it makes sense that you changed your message. I'm just curious why you decided on let's fix your confusing positioning. Because when I think about positioning, I think about it separate from messaging. Like positioning is more of an internal, here's our positioning canvas. Here's like how we are going to position ourselves. The market, the competition, where we fit, who we're for, what's the unique differentiator for us. Like that's positioning. But messaging shows up in different ways depending on where you're putting out the message. On the homepage, we're going to say this. In emails, we're going to say this. On social media, we're going to say this. But you have to have like a starting point for what is your product, who it's for, what's unique about you versus the competition, and words you want to use, phrases you want to use. That to me is messaging. So just curious.
Yeah, for sure. So what we see, as you would probably agree with, messaging has to be an outpouring of the positioning at some level. And so we distinguish between, you could maybe think of it as product positioning versus brand positioning, where what we are doing is not actually, in I'd say 99% of the cases, especially with bigger companies that have lots of different products and segments and use cases, we are rarely saying, what are the things that we want to say or get across about ourselves, regardless of the product, regardless of the audience? That to me falls more into brand positioning. Like if you think of Apple as a brand, you're like, what does Apple stand for? It's creativity. It's challenging the status quo. It's ecosystem. They have all these things that it's like, it doesn't matter what segment I'm talking to, whether it's B2B that Apple's doing sales to, or all the B2C or hardware or software or subscriptions or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Those things are kind of true. They're embedded into everything that Apple does. So that's like brand positioning. It's like the positioning the brand, the company at that level. That's not really what we do. What we would do is say, all right, you have a company. Most of the companies that we work with, maybe Series A, Series B, Series C is probably like the bulk of them. They don't have infinite money. They're not Apple. So they don't have, endless trillions of dollars of market cap or whatever. So they have a lot of different segments that they could go after. They have a lot of different products that they could sell. And for us, what we're trying to figure out is what would be kind of the primary product positioning that would be the leading edge of the company. So knowing that, let's say they have 20 different products, like take someone like Stripe. We didn't work with Stripe, but Stripe has, I think, like 30 different products. We originally incorporated our business in Delaware using Stripe Atlas. So you can get incorporate a startup using Stripe. People can set up crypto stuff using one of their crypto products. They have a carbon removal platform that they sell. And then they have some payment modules. So Stripe, when you ask people, what does Stripe do? Most people will say they do payments or payments processing. They won't say, oh, they do, get incorporated in Delaware as a startup. They won't say carbon removal or anything like that, right? And so what we're trying to say is, okay, we're trying to find, especially in a B2B context, what's going to be the core either market category you play in that most people think of you, that's not going to probably be a summary of everything you do. It will probably be one main thing that you do that you're most known for.
You
And
don't
what's
like the
that thing going to be?
all-in-one?
Well, so the funny thing is,
All-in-one.
the all-in-one can be good, provided that people actually are trying to do all those things at once and would be looking to shop. Like we're in Riverside. Riverside is in many ways an all-in-one platform. You can record the show, it will clip the show, it will share the show, stuff like that. And so in that case, I'm like, probably one person or one team is actually doing all of those things and is using 10 different tools. And maybe the platform of all-in-one of Riverside actually is pretty strong positioning. But either way, right, what we're looking at, like when you think of Vanta, it's not a category that you think of. You think of SOC 2 compliance, the use case of getting SOC 2 compliant. I actually was on Instagram the other day and I got a Vanta ad, which is funny that they're using these, consumer channels. And the ad was basically, hey, are you trying to get SOC 2 compliant? We make it so easy. We automate. So even to this day, as a multi-billion-dollar company that has this trust platform that does a million different things, they're still tip of the spear saying most people use us for getting SOC 2 compliant. That's the thing that we want to lead with. And when most people think of us, I just posted today a screenshot from ChatGPT because I was trying to remember what Okta did. And I was like, what do they do again? It's like, I think they do like single sign-on. I asked ChatGPT, I said, what does Okta do in 1 to 3 words? And it said identity management. And then I said, could you say that again, but only use words that a real human would say? And then it said single sign-on. And I'm like, okay, I was right. So like in general, that's the decisions we're trying to help the founders and the teams get to. It's like, what is going to be that leading edge thing? You got 10 different products, you got 100 different segments. What's the thing that you want to be known for in the next 5 years? Like we still say, what does Gong do? Oh, they do call recording. People don't really say conversation intelligence. They say the initial, if you think of like a band or an artist, like they think of the initial hit, like if you said, what is Britney Spears' biggest song? Or, what is she known for? It'd be like, oh, Hit Me Baby One More Time. It's like, it came out in 2004 or whatever. She's had tons of other chart topping things, but it's like, that's the thing that put her on the map. So that's the same thing with software companies. There's usually something that really puts them on the map. And these early companies that are doing 1 to 3 million, they haven't decided what that hit is going to be. And so for us, we're like, all right, let's figure out what the hit is. And then we do move into some messaging where we say, okay, well, if we say, let's say we were working with Vanta. We didn't work with Vanta, but imagine at the beginning we did. And we said, all right, we think the strategy is we want to lead with this Trojan horse of focusing primarily on SOC 2 compliance, and then we'll upsell, cross-sell the rest of it. But for simplicity's sake and to keep our positioning very light, word of mouth really strong, we mainly want people to know we cover this one use case. So say we do that. Then we would say, okay, well, what are the ways that people try to get SOC 2 compliant today without Vanta? What's broken about those things and how do you do it better? And we try to boil that down to like 3 or 4 core improvements that they would make on the workflow. And then we would present those things on the first half of the homepage. And then we say, like some of these core points about getting SOC 2 compliant, as you do customer research, as you bring this out into the field, as you get sales data, as you bring this, you're probably going to want to tweak some of these things. You might change like specifics. People might be doing this in different ways, but the long-term bet we're trying to get them to make would be like, SOC 2 compliance is kind of our long-term bet. And they've been around now for I don't know how many years, but that's been their wedge use case for probably at least 5 years. And now they're a multi-billion-dollar company, still on the same long-term bet from the beginning, despite having added all these other features and stuff like that. So that's kind of how we mix like the positioning strategy with a little bit of the messaging. But to your point, right, like once we get into the nitty-gritty of the messaging, that is where like buyer feedback and customer calls and all that stuff really comes into play to hone it. And that's why we often say like, okay, this is like what we're giving you right now of these initial arguments are based on the research you've done, the conversations you've had, your sales calls. And this is your best stab right now. You may find ways to articulate this better as time goes on, and you should update and change it. But the thing we would say don't change is don't switch to a different use case, right? Stick with SOC 2 compliance, ride it out until you need to pivot. But if it's still working, keep going with it.
Yeah. And you mentioned like 12, 18 months. Like you mentioned long-term stuff, at least give it time versus we tried it for a couple weeks, Anthony, and we're still not sure. Should we change it? No, you really need to just like put a flag, stake in the ground and believe in this thing in order for it to be effective. Yeah.
And not to cut you off, but Calendly is a great example. 10 years. For 10 years, they said, it's something like easy scheduling ahead was like the H1. And then it was, we replace back and forth emails that people use to get time booked or something like that. For 10 years, they were going to market with that message. And then they had to reevaluate it sometime internally because the market, the category of scheduling tools had become a thing. When they started, there wasn't a category of scheduling tools. It was very like use case based. But then now there's Cal.com. There's a million of these other little ones competing with them.
Yeah.
And they recently changed the positioning. They're no longer positioning against back and forth emails. Now they say we are the number one scheduling tool. And they're basically like, we're the OGs. We're better than the Cal.coms and stuff like that. If they had gone to market at the beginning saying we're the number one scheduling tool, people would say, what's a scheduling tool? A Google Calendar? You're like, well, no, not really that. Because the category didn't exist. So like to your point, long-term bet, they literally had that on some version of that sentence against the back and forth emails for 10 years. And you can look at their heroes, like when you go to the Wayback Machine, and they only recently changed. So we are talking big long-term bets that represent whole groups of people that they're trying to win.
Right. And so that was one thing I wanted to ask you, like, do companies stick with the positioning after you help them? Or do they go back to their old ways? And like, what's been your experience from clients that you've had? Do they stick with it? Do you see, you've been in business for a while, so you've had clients early on that have been using the positioning for years now, right? If they decided to, or do they tweak it? Like, what are you seeing then after time goes by?
Highly variable, right? Some companies will really lean into it and stick with it. Other companies won't, and they'll change and adjust. What
How
we've
does that
tried to
make you
do,
feel, Anthony?
sad. It makes me feel sad and pain and grief.
Because
The
they
funnier
come to
thing is
you
when,
as an expert, right? Like they
yeah,
come to you and they come to FletchPMM as the expert here, and they work with you and they pay you and they're like, help us. And then you do. And then they don't continue with it. And I'm just curious, like, why do you think that happens?
yeah, I think the ones that make me less sad are like they run with it for a year and then they change. Because we often say, like, it's going to take you a year to really know if this is the right long-term bet to make. We've walked this timeline out before. We mostly work with sales-led companies that have a little bit higher ACV. So they're talking maybe 3 to 6 month sales cycles from the first call to like signing. So it's like, great. Okay, let's decide we're going to go out to market with this new message. We have all these amazing AI advancements and stuff, but we're still going to market essentially the same way we did 10 years ago, right? We're using ads, we're using organic algorithms, we're using SEO, we're using cold outbound, we're going to networking events. There is really no silver bullet with AI to like somehow get the word out really fast. Everything is still the same. So it's going to take you at least a quarter to get this message out there. Then you start the sales process, right? So now you're starting sales process with new clients, with people who have seen this new messaging and are taking a sales call being like, I saw that you do this thing. That's very interesting. I'm in that bucket and now I want to talk to you. Great. Now that's 3 months in. Then you got 3 to 6 months of sales cycle. Then they have to buy and you have to see, are they good clients, right? Is this really the group we want to stick with? Because sometimes what we'll find is like, we worked with a company called Freckle. They made a long-term positioning bet that they were like, and they were very early. They were like, we think we want to steal market share from Clay. And Clay, big SaaS company. So they went to market as basically like a Clay for non-technical people. They were like, Clay is
Yeah.
great, but it's so complicated. You have to need a Clay agency to do it for you, or you got to hire a GTM engineer. We're basically Clay, but anyone can use it. So that message worked really well. And Nathan, the founder, he brought this. He made lists of people who were using Clay. He followed them on the forums of like people talking about Clay. And they basically just brought a version of like, hey, we see a lot of people try Clay and they get stuck because it's really hard. And we're basically a non-technical version alternative. And he was getting people up the wazoo. So he did that strategy for like a year. They hit a bunch of new milestones, helped him raise their next round. And then they made a very interesting discovery. The non-technical users actually were not great customers in the long term. That they were like, they were great for a couple months and then they would churn because they were like not technical enough. And then they found a
Oh, geez.
subset of these people who still didn't like Clay. And they actually came back. Nathan came back to do another sprint with us, like about a year and a half after the first one. And it was like, I have all this new market data. We ran with that for a while. We got all these new customers. Some were good, some were bad. We realized there's maybe a subset that we need to figure out how to position for. And so we ended up still kind of going against Clay, but around a specific use case of CRM enrichment. They were like, the people who come in, didn't like Clay and use us for CRM enrichment are like the best customers. So we're talking a year, right? Before anyone
Yeah.
can discover.
That
So
is
when we,
so
yeah,
interesting. Go
yeah. So
ahead.
we see,
No, I mean it
yeah,
takes a while, right? Because then you go out, it takes a year, then they see how the customers actually are, whether they stick around or they don't want to stick around, they churn. And then it's like, wait a second, but they go back to see what about the other customers, like finding the insight there of who
yep.
did stick around and now tweaking it. But that's after a year goes by. So go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why we always tell people, especially people who come to us thinking they will be able to use short-term methods like A/B tests to determine this. You just
I
can't,
hate
right? You
that,
know,
Anthony. You can't A/B test your way into strategy,
100%. So
right?
you cannot. So yeah, so back to your original question, right? So you have this long-term bet. So if someone runs our positioning strategy for a year and then pivots, that's totally fine. We're like, you may need to because you've learned all this new stuff and that got you to maybe your next growth stage and maybe you do need to pivot or maybe you need to persevere, like old school lean startup pivot or persevere stuff. The stuff that makes me so sad is when we do our 2-week sprint and it is fast by design. we tell people, we're like, there are some people who want to do this process much slower. We're not for you. We're for the people who are banging their heads against the wall and like, we need to get unstuck yesterday. We kind of know loosely what the options are, and we need to make a group decision, and we want to make something that we can charge after. So we really say it's a sprint. We use that phrase for a reason. We're going very fast. We meet a bunch of times over 2 weeks and basically try to land the strategy in week 1 based on everything they've brought from months and months and months of stuff ahead of time. And then the second week is all around the documentation on the homepage. And we go through, we've been trying to do things to basically help them understand the implications of the strategy and to even understand the strategy bet that they're making. So early on, when people would pivot, I think some of the blame was on us because we live and breathe this stuff. So we say, you get the strategy, right? And we say it to them and they're like, I think so. And then they wouldn't really. And then they would go out and execute it completely different. And we're like, they didn't trust the strategy. And then if we reach out to them, they're like, yeah, we've been doing the strategy. And we're like, maybe we're just not explaining it well. So we've progressively over so many projects have tried to make it more and more simple, which is why we switched. We used to have a positioning canvas, which was like all these boxes. And you still see these in positioning decks and stuff like that. Now we like, no. We're going to do a PowerPoint. It has 6 slides. Here's the market we're going after in a very, very clear way. Here's the way we frame the problem. Here's the way we frame our solution. And then here's the 3 supporting arguments. So it's 6 slides. There's a max 2 to 3 sentences per slide. And we actually go as far to have the founder read the slides out loud in front of the group at the end. And we nitpick every single word. And we say, I'm having you read this out loud so you can decide, would I actually feel comfortable saying this without even thinking website or anything? And we say, we need this deck to be, you're so on board that you would send this deck to every new employee who joins the company. Say, here's how you talk about our company. Here's how we explain it in 1 sentence. Here's how we talk about the problem. Here's who we're for. And you have to be comfortable with that. And so what we found is companies at the end of week 1, when they do the deck, when they read it, they're either one of 2 things. They're either very excited, like this is amazing. We've been trying to get this verbalized. We're so excited. Or you can tell they're not going to do it. And then we have to level set with them. And we usually will offer them some paths. Like one, we will say, and the funny thing is we'll sense their apprehension when they read the deck. And I'll be like, all right, you just read it. How you feeling? And they're like, yeah. Okay.
They're like, yeah.
And you're like, this is not.
I just read it. Yeah.
So then it will show up.
That's a fact. Yeah.
I did read it. So then it will show up in the revisions on the copywriting. So we'll send the V1 of the homepage. We show it to them live, and then we give them a feedback form to react to it. And so inevitably, they will start tweaking the copy, and it will just be completely different ideas, completely different strategy. Why can't we talk about how we're different than this vendor? Well, what about these enterprise company? And we're like, those are just different strategies. And we talked through them ad nauseum. And you guys collectively chose this one. So then we basically give them an out. We're like, all right, do you really want to do the strategy? You know, you've gone through the whole process. Your team brought all your best and your brightest, and you aligned on the strategy in principle. And now I'm fearing you're losing your nerve. And so they can decide if they really want to do it or not. Now that we've moved to the deck, I think we're seeing people launch the website much faster.
Yeah.
We're seeing more alignment, more longer term alignment, because I think people are just getting it more. It's like we've made it simpler and simpler.
Hey, it's Anna, host of Building with Buyers. I started the show because I found that customers play such an important role in business growth, but they're often overlooked. We're so focused on net new. But the thing that makes you unique is not your product. There are so many companies solving the same problem, and they have customers too. The thing that makes you unique is your superfan customers. That's your moat. Most positioning and messaging is guesswork. I'm a customer insights and strategy advisor, and I help my clients by interviewing their customer superfans and translating those insights into clear and compelling positioning and messaging that specific people care about. So you get deeper engagement with customers and prospects, increased inbound to demos, better sales conversations, increased word of mouth, and closed deals. If you're done guessing, stumbling along, and want to be more customer obsessed, reach out. I'd love to help. And now, back to the episode.
The deck is something I also use. I find it to be the best way to share information. Nobody wants to read another Google Doc with a ton of words on it. And the deck forces you to use less words and have a powerful thing to say. So I also have a deck. It has 10 slides. And then I have like an appendix section because we also talk about other stuff in there. But I found that to be super effective too. I don't make the founder read everything. Maybe I should. But like that is the most important thing, is to get everyone to agree, like, this is what we're going to use. And then you can work on the homepage wireframe and then they make, right? But if they don't agree with what's in the deck, 100%, then it's like, don't go forward. There's no reason to go forward with any of the other marketing collateral, including the homepage. So I love that. I love the fact that you use a deck as well. So one of the things that I want to talk about really, and we've gone into the like talking about lots of different things, not specifically the thing I wanted to bring you on to talk about. So I do want to hit on it, which is how do you get the entire company marching to the same beat? Is it the deck? Like after you present this positioning and some of the words you're using and phrases and, that's messaging, right? Especially for larger companies. I just was in a prospect conversation the other day, and that's really the hard part. It's like we know the marketing team knows what they want to say. They're like so confident. Maybe they have their own deck or their own doc or whatever they're using. Everybody's on the same page in marketing. But how the heck do we get everybody else marching to the same beat? That's probably one of the hardest things because of politics, because of other people wanting it to be their idea. It just becomes very illogical in larger companies. So what's your take on, like, have you had to help people figure this stuff out? And if so, like, what works?
Yeah. We are more analogous, I would say, to like a brand agency in this sense. A lot of ways we're not like a brand agency, but a brand agency will give you the brand guidelines. They will say, we don't say this word, we do say that word. So we saw recently a company we were working with, they sent us their brand guidelines from some brand agency. And they said, we do not call ourselves a platform, because they were pitching this idea where they are very modular. And so they're like, we never want to say we're a platform because you can use any of our solutions independent of each other. And then I went on their homepage, and the first line in the H1 is the blank blank platform. Like the brand agency probably in a smart way has said, I'm not going to go into long-term change management because that is such a different type of business. And we've sort of made the same distinction. We're like, okay, and we've thought about other offers. One thing we're testing with some companies is like a monthly subscription to us as people, basically to be like the positioning monitor, to be like, is this actually being executed? So we're talking with basically having companies like once a month send us all the assets they produced from a marketing perspective, sales perspective, and then we look it over and basically cross-reference with the strategy and basically point out like how far has alignment drifted. So we're testing that out as something, but in general, it comes down to the strength of the leader and whether or not they're actually going to push it through, which is why it's so important for the driving force to not just be on the marketing team. So like take an example of that Klaviyo company. So Klaviyo repositioned not that long ago. They used to call themselves, I think, a marketing automation platform, like in that bucket. And they said they were primarily for, I think, e-commerce. They repositioned as a CRM for B2C companies. So they changed both the category and market they were playing in from marketing automation to CRM. And they changed the segmentation of saying just e-commerce to actually B2C, where, e-commerce has B2B and B2C. So they were like narrowing down in a way, but then also broadening to be like any type of business, not just an internet business. So when I was following the follow-up of this positioning, right, they put it on the homepage. It was in the H1. And I follow one of their marketing people, and they went at some conference and they were being interviewed. And it was the first sentence they said, tell me what Klaviyo does. And they said, well, we're the first CRM really built for B2C. And you can imagine that if you're putting this message out there, it's on the homepage, it's being said by the different departments. Then when the sales team gets on a sales call and someone asks, let's say they didn't put it on the homepage and it was just internal, and someone gets on the sales team and they go, so you guys are like a marketing automation platform. We need that. Is the salesperson in that moment who's getting 50% quota,
No,
50%
we're not.
salary.
We're the CRM for B2C. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not doing that, right? They're like, 50% of my money comes from me closing these deals. They're going to say, oh, that's exactly what we are, right? We're built for e-commerce. But if you get it on the homepage, and that's driven by the highest level executives being like, no, we are actually saying this, and we have to say it, you're going to get people on sales calls going like this. So tell me about this whole CRM thing. Why do we need a B2C CRM when we could just use Salesforce? And now that salesperson's on the hook, and they gotta go, well, let me deliver the pitch, right? So in many ways, right, like we can't force a company to align because we're not a change management consultancy, which there are many of those.
But the CEO can. The CEO can force everyone to.
They can. And if they don't, it's going to be an uphill battle. And you'll see the road is paved with strategic narratives that were launched and quickly forgotten, Like we're working with another company. They've been around for, 15 plus years. And they have like 7 different strategic narratives that they've tried to do. And there's remnants of them all over the place. And you're like, that probably came from some sort of exercise. And that came from a different exercise. And whoever is at the top just probably got bored with it or left it alone. And then it just died. But you still see the leftover like messaging baggage from all these different failed things. So it really comes down to the leader being like, no, we are sticking with this. We're still doing it, we're going to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like somebody needs to be the ultimate decision maker. Everybody's voice can be heard. That's fine. But at the end of the day, like, especially with strategy, somebody needs to make the decision and it can't be like everybody's hands in the bucket. And I think that the best way to do that is really what you and I do, which is like, we are thoughtful about this. We've worked with a bunch of companies. We have a way, an approach, an expertise. And then you present it and present the risks, present the options, present the risks, and then make a decision and then go with it, right?
Yeah.
And have the leader in the meeting. And then that's it. That's how you do it. I don't think it has to be complicated. I don't think you need to have like 20 meetings on this.
No. And I mean, if you think about it as doing a formal research project before a positioning project, right? Like that might be a really long endeavor. And it might be worth doing, right? Like, so we will tell people, they'll say, how do I know if I'm ready to work with you guys? And we'll say, okay, do you feel like you have enough confidence and you understand your customers and the available markets that you could make at the end of 2 weeks, at least a 12-month decision? Or does that sound like a nightmare that will never work? And then they can self-identify, right? Like some of them will say like, especially if it's a really early stage company, like in AI where everything's changing by the week, they're like, I can't make a 12-month commitment of anything, right? Like I'm going to change next week. And we're like, don't do a positioning project then. You're still in experimentation mode, research mode, and that's great, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that. There's phases of, like the whole double diamond thing, right? Like we go really wide to figure out what the options are and what's available, what could we be? And it's very theoretical or maybe it goes very practical or interviewing hundreds of customers and stuff like that. And then we're like, all right, great. We got all the inputs and now we really need to narrow. We need to make a decision. So we step in at the decision point. We don't step in at the earlier one.
Okay. So you mentioned this and I was going to bring it up too. On your website, at the very bottom, if somebody ends up getting there, it's like the FAQs. And I went there and I was reading up on it and it says outsourcing, talking to customers and that you don't recommend it. And that's the work that I do. So, of course, I wanted to bring it up during this call. When you ask companies, do you have a good grasp of your customer? They will most likely, except for those AI companies that are being real, they will always say yes.
For sure.
And guess what? That doesn't mean that they do. So, especially early stage startups like non-AI or AI, and even growth stage, because their grasp on customers means they talk to customers about the product, like, hey, you like it? What don't you like it? Features, blah, 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 which is important, but it only gets you so far. They don't know how to like dig deeper into the buyer journey and take me back to that time. Like, why did you buy? Oh, it's easy to use. That's surface level answers. Everyone's going to say that, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to go into the explanation here because I talked about it in my other podcast episodes of like, what does understanding customers actually mean? And the fact that I don't think that companies understand their customers, even though they say they do. But I'm curious, like, the outsourcing talking to customers, why don't you recommend it? Because what I find is founders and even marketers don't know how to do this stuff because it's just not their expertise. Like their
Yeah.
expertise, we were never taught this stuff, like how do you get into an interview with a customer and what do you ask them in order to do research and get insights that will help solve a business problem? We're not taught this stuff in business school. We're not taught this stuff when we join a company. Nobody teaches us this stuff. So, and I once tried this actually. I was like, I'm going to take my approach, give it to the founder, and have them just interview their customers.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't know what. He was lost. He was like, well, they answered the question. And then what was I supposed to ask after that? Right. So I once tried it. It didn't work. So I'm just curious, like, what's the solution? Or what's on your mind when you're thinking about that?
Yeah. And that, I would say, that FAQ answer has been there for probably 3 years. Some of my thinking has probably evolved even on that since we first wrote that. I think if I was being super dogmatic and idealistic, I would say it would be far better for a founding team, someone on the founding team, to learn the art of talking to customers.
They're not going to do that, Anthony.
Some will not, for sure. And that may be the thing that makes or breaks their company. I find it similar to, there was this book a long time ago that an old boss recommended. It was called like Leading from the Second Chair. And it was the whole concept of like leading up, of like you have a leader, you're not the leader, you're under them. How do you help influence them and sway their decisions? And I tried to lead my way up in lots of businesses that I worked in and was always unsuccessful. And I have given up on that as a concept. I do not think you can lead up. I think that you can change companies. But if the leader
is like managing up? Is that similar?
Yeah, similar, right? Like managing up and, I think we can get the leader to pick, I don't think that's really a thing. I think that most leaders are leaders because they like to lead and they're going to take you down a specific path based on their own internal gut. I think people who try to use data to get leaders to change their minds are almost always not successful. We were on a call with a big company. They were doing 150 million. And the one guy who was under the CEO was trying to lead up and he was trying to manage up and presenting this amazing case with data. And it challenged the internal perspective of the leader, the CEO. And so what did he say? He said, I don't trust that data. That's wrong. So you're like, well, he spent all this time, he went and got all this data, he presented it, and ultimately the founder is going to do what the founder is going to do because that's why they started a company. They don't want to have people boss them around. They want to do what they want. So to me, the tricky thing is outsourcing the research. When we used to do this, so we spun out of another agency and we would run long jobs to be done research projects as part of our service. And we would help them build their MVP. We would help get it live. But we would do these customer research, both embedded in the jobs to be done framework. And then it would cascade down to user research and all that stuff. It'd be really long projects. And most of the time, we would present the research and it would be the exact same thing that would happen with that CEO from the other company. They would just go, I don't believe that. Well, look, here's what they said. No, I think if you had asked it different or if you had talked to different people, no, I don't buy it. I think it's the thing that
doesn't happen to me, Anthony.
You might have been better at it than we were. Maybe that was because my flip was like, if I was going to be in your shoes, I think I would design the business more around teaching people how to do it. But I also wanted to be a teacher when I was younger. Like I went to school to be a teacher. I want to be a high school English teacher.
Oh, wow.
I almost finished and then I pivoted to something else because something else came up. But like teaching to me comes more naturally. That's more my bent. My sister was a teacher. My brother was a teacher. If I was in your shoes, I'd be like, oh, we should make this a teaching business. We should teach people how to do this. And, there's people who are trying to do that. The Mom Test book and, people like Teresa Torres and all sorts of people in that space who are like, we're going to enable you. Bob Mesta, exactly, right? They're writing books, they're doing teaching. So I would find truly outsourcing it, like you go and talk to the customers and then come back and tell me what they said. In my view, I think it would be better at least to do it with them or code. And I don't know exactly your delivery model. So you may have some level of that. But that would be like, it's the same thing when founders say, well, I'm going to outsource my business development, right? I'm just going to find someone to grow the business. And we're like, can you do that? Like, isn't that That's the job, right?
That's your job, right?
That's the job, is to grow the business.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I was recently talking to Asia Arangio. Do you know her?
Yeah,
I don't
I
know
do.
if you know. Yeah, and so she does this work.
I think she's a speaker at a conference. I think we're both speakers at a conference in like a week and a half.
Yeah, she just was at Spark Together, which I met up with her there. But she talked about the fact that when she does this research, which is a large part of the work that she does, she brings folks into the call. So she brings the leadership team into the call.
I like that.
I don't know how that skews the way the customer answers questions. So that's my only concern, because when it's me and I'm like, I have a different email and I'm coming in from the outside and I'm part of it, but I'm not, and I create that safe space, it's a little bit different, the answers that you get. I try to go deep on things and we don't just stop at surface level. And I'm just nervous that if I bring the CEO of a company into that call, the conversation will not unravel in the same way, right?
Yeah.
So just like researchers for B2C companies, they're the ones in the room. Like they were always, when I come from B2C, for those focus groups, you don't have the CEO is there behind glass.
Yeah.
But you don't have the CEO sitting in there.
For sure.
Listening, because it's the CEO. Like, I'm not going to say that in front of him. I love your lip balm. It's amazing. I hate this, honestly, but like, I love it. It's great, right? So that would be my only concern there.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you telling me that you wrote that 3 years ago. And so, yeah, everything kind of changes. But I also appreciate the fact that you told me about the companies that outsource their business development. I also, like, that's the job. So I agree with you on that. I just haven't figured out a way to give this information, like to teach this information to founders who are not looking to be taught in the first place. You know what I mean?
For sure, for sure. And again, as we went longer, I think the bigger reason that it makes less sense for someone like us to do it as part of our process is because we start these sprints and the different markets, there's so many different potential markets that like we wouldn't even necessarily know who to talk to until we had mapped all those different possibilities. And then you theoretically would need to understand what prospects think more than what customers think. There's customer research, which is really powerful and can be very important. But like Winter, and you're familiar with PEP and Winter, and that's the platform we talked about them before, WYNTER.
Yeah, I know Winter. Yeah. And so you could literally go in there and you can put out your message, right? And see how folks in your ICP react to that message. Totally.
Yeah. And the challenge is the way that we do market segmentation, which we think is an innovation or just an improvement on the typical way. Like when people normally do market segmentation, they list a bunch of firmographics, right? The company's at this size, this revenue. And yet, when we build marketing materials and we send them to those segments, we get people who say, this couldn't be less relevant, right? So in the same way that, there was that slide going around the internet, like in B2C persona building, and it's like two people who are in their 70s, they live in castles, they live in the UK, and they had all these things. And it was, like one of the royal family and Ozzy Osbourne. And they were like, look, they have all the same demographics. And they couldn't be more different. And like the whole inside of Jobs to Be Done was like, you don't buy based on your personas. You buy based on the workflows you're doing or the needs.
Your challenge, your needs. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So in B2B, it's the same. So we build ICPs in the same faulty way that B2C companies build personas. We say, here's the 10 firmographics, and then we blast them with marketing or cold email or whatever. And it's a hilariously small response rate because people are like, this isn't relevant to me. So what we found was the better way to segment is by people who would self-identify as doing a workflow, like from our perspective, a use case, or are self-identify as having or shopping for a specific category of tool. And those things are very hard to recruit for customer interviews, for prospects. Like Winter does not have a show me all the people who are currently doing this workflow, right?
Yeah.
There's not really a way to know that. There's signals you could try to do it. Like there's all the companies making signals-based stuff where they're like, if you have a bunch of hiring new things, you could assume that they're maybe doing sales training as part of these workflows, right? Running a sales training program, but it's always one level removed. So when we build these segments, we're looking at use case-based segments, job segments, you could call them, depending on your definition of jobs to be done. Or we're looking at markets that exist around categories, like the CRM market, the marketing automation market. And we're looking at those. And again, these are harder things to get readily available to be like, let me go recruit. There's no recruiting platforms that have lists based on use cases.
Totally. So for
which makes it challenging. For prospects, right?
If the sales team is talking to folks, I find that they already have a lot of information on this. And I just loved hearing your point of view, Anthony, on some of this stuff. And also kind of the trajectory of your company and your experience with companies and your point of view and how that's changed too. Anthony, you're awesome. Thank you for joining me. Anthony is on LinkedIn. If you want to find him, he's at Anthony Pierri. You can go to FletchPMM.com in order to find out more about FletchPMM and the work that you do. Anthony, thank you so much. It's our second time around. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. So thanks so
much for having me. It was so fun the first time and just as fun this time.
Awesome. See you on the bike trail.
See you on the trail.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Building with Buyers. New episodes drop weekly, so make sure you're following wherever you get your podcasts. You can find me on LinkedIn, Anna Furmanov. Visit my website to learn more about how to turn customer insights into positioning and messaging your buyers will understand. FurmanovMarketing.com. And don't forget to leave a review if you're loving the show.